podcast is brought to you by GAIA Africa, a private members business club for women committed to developing and servicing the top 5% of Africa's lustrous female founders, corporate CEOs, other C-suite executives, professionals, board members, business innovators, and creatives. The 5-episode podcast series is sponsored by Pinnacle Oil and Gas, an indigenous oil and gas company active across the entire downstream value chain, with emphasis on petroleum trading, marketing, distribution, and retail segments of the Nigerian oil and gas sector. Welcome to episode 2. My name is Adesuwa Onyenokwe of Today's Woman, and I am the moderator for today's podcast on the subject of economic opportunities. Now, the McKinsey report, as we identified already, has stated the state of women in the workplace and in society. And one of the areas that has been identified as working against women is the area of economic opportunities. That's why I have two wonderful ladies in the house today that are going to be giving justice to it. And I think I should first read out their profile so you will know that we have heavyweights in the house. And Eloho is the first person. Eloho, yeah, I got something on you here, Eloho. It's got to be somewhere here. There you go. Eloho Omame is the founding managing director and CEO of Endeavor Nigeria, Nigeria's first entrepreneurship support organization focused on high growth, scale-up company. Over a 20-year career, Elo has worked with entrepreneurs, companies, and teams across multiple industries at a range of life cycle stages on important strategic growth and capital raising projects. You know how to help us read capital. I like the sound of that. Welcome, Eloho.
Hi.
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Great. I am well and can't wait to hear what you have to say. And I also have Tola Odeyemi. She is a seasoned professional with over 15 years of experience in government and regulatory roles, working at senior government levels, both at state and federal levels in Nigeria, on strategy development and implementation, policymaking, and operations. Tola Odeyemi is the immediate past head of public policy for West Africa at Uber Technologies. Hi, Tola.
Hello.
What happened? Why are you the immediate past head?
I decided to take some time off to raise my new baby.
Well, you see, that's part of what we're talking about. I mean, that's part of what we're talking about here. Something happens to women somewhere along the line, babies come, and suddenly it seems like the trajectory in the corporate world is different. What do you think about that? Let's start with you, Tola, since you're the last speaker.
I mean, I don't know if everybody's situation is different, right?
That's right.
I mean, for me, it's because even throughout my career, I'd actually been waiting for this moment to have a break, and a break where people would be like, why are you taking a break? Like, they're like, oh yeah, this time it's like, oh, you had a baby and you're taking a break, so nobody judges me. I don't know if that makes any sense. But this is the one time I think I'm allowed to take a break after having a baby. So I had already planned for this season.
So is the corporate sector not female friendly enough that we just want to take a break? I'm just wondering. Go ahead. Let Eloho respond to that.
I don't have a baby.
Yet.
And I say that, it's interesting. We've been friends for a long time.
Really?
It has nothing to do with why we're on the podcast.
How did it happen?
But I say that to say we're very similar life stages. I don't have any children. And it's interesting because I do want to have children. And the decision around, of course, I will have my children. But the truth is, I wonder as well kind of what that means in terms of my career and my trajectory. Because it does hurt women. And I think we are forced to make these choices. So you say, I want a child. I've wanted a child for a while. It's part of the things I have laid out for goals for myself. So I'm going to have my child. And the cost is what it is. But the reality is that we do have to navigate that. I think I was looking at something very recently where they were saying, if you look at women's lifetime earnings, the most significant indicator is whether or not she had a child.
Wow.
That's the thing that determines ultimately, if you look at a woman in a country, a woman's lifetime earnings over a man's lifetime earnings, the most significant explanatory factor, we know there's a gap. The most significant explanatory factor is that decision to have a child. So it does cost women. And sometimes it's not as sinister as you have a child, you go away, you come back, and suddenly you're on a lower salary. But it's things like, it manifests in different ways. It can be things like,
they spend more on their children.
yeah, right. So you spend more on your children, so you invest less on yourself. So there's all kinds of different ways that decision ultimately impacts us. So I can't wait to do what Tola has done.
No, but were you scared about this, Tola?
Oh, yes. But I guess I was also, I don't say lucky or fortunate in the fact that when I did have a child, I had gone far enough in my career to even think of taking time off, right? This is my personal belief. Like, if I had a child earlier in my career, I think it would have hurt more than having a child sort of,
And I believe that's what's happening. Many more women are having children a little later. But I mean, like our first conversation, we're talking about how even if they did go, how did they transition back? Which is why I'd like you both to address the issue of economic opportunities, because the feeling is that more than 26 million has been left, US dollars has been left on the table if there's no parity. Yet we're saying parity is like 100 and plus years away. So if we're going to move the needle, we have to be talking about what kind of opportunities can we create, and how do we do that?
So, I mean, having, now using my example, having kids, right? One thing I have noticed is even in thinking of going back to work, one thing I am going to prioritize is flexibility. That
Flexi time.
And just generally across the world, most corporates, and the higher you go, it actually almost punishes flexibility, right? And it's almost trying to find that balance between, yes, I want to go to the next level, but then I need to be able to sometimes work from home. Sometimes I need to be able to work 3 times a week. I will get all my work done, but I can't be in this physical space. I can't be in this physical space all the time. And, that's usually punished the higher you go. And
up until today, I would think, Eloho, for example, that COVID has proven that to be nonsense.
With all these things, there's always the baseline, what has been proven, and then there's always how that ends up reflecting in women's lives and women's careers, right?
Tell me about
That's the reality. So COVID has proven in theory that we can kind of create flexible work lives. COVID also showed us, though, 2 things. One was that even when we were all working from home, the burden of the work from home and all of that care was still primarily on the women, and in fact, potentially significantly more. COVID also showed us that when you take the entire world into lockdown, there are a bunch of essential services that suddenly everybody is looking for. Those are the services that tend to be less valued in terms of their remuneration. And guess what? Those tend to be the roles that women are more heavily employed in. So for example, nursing, right? Etc.
Home care.
Those tend to be primarily female dominated. So COVID for me was an interesting experiment in how we think about women's work. I completely agree with Tola on the flexibility point in terms of creating opportunities. The other thing that, also occurs to me is when you have 50% of the population who carries the burden of home care and home lives, maybe the way to create opportunities for that 50% is to create infrastructures whereby they can actually leave those homes and go out and work. So how do we do that? By distributing work better, for example, and that's a cultural shift, by thinking about, okay, how do we create a layer of workers who can come into our homes, right, and take on the burden of looking after our children, whilst those of us who are potentially higher skilled, etc., can actually create the time to go out and work, because that is also a barrier.
Isn't that like a house help?
It is, but not everybody is completely comfortable with the idea of that. So maybe when you talk about creating economic opportunities, maybe there is an opportunity to create
a space there,
a much more professional layer of carers and caregivers, male or female, so that the professional women don't have to balance and juggle their time in the way that we currently are having to do. So at a practical level, I think about things like that. There's flexibility. There's also things like for employers and governments. And I'm sorry, I try and read a lot of stuff about this, but even things like how governments think about things like planning and city planning. Mm-hmm. There was an experiment in some country, I think it was in Eastern Europe, where they created this new, almost like high-rise development for people to live in. And they did an experiment. There were 2. There was one in which, they talk about multi-use. And so the work environment was right there. The home environment was right there. The childcare was all built in, right? And there was another one where it was all kind of modern, high, what have you, but people still had to do that commute. And guess what? when you have to commute 3, 4, 5 hours, that has implications for ultimately how you spend your time.
Absolutely. So now that let's talk about the kind of opportunities that even corporates can create that can make it easy for women. I mean, you just left Uber, for example. Are there examples that people can copy that exist in an organization like that? If not, what do you think?
I mean, so maybe not at Uber. When I in my past life, when I was working at Central Bank of Nigeria, one of the things they tried to do, I'm not sure whether they implemented it, again, because of, sort of trying to keep more women in the workplace, was right in the building, creating a space for children below 5, I believe.
Like a crash.
Like a crash. And you could either bring your own carer with you or, they would take, and that was because, over like having many conversations with women coming back into the workplace. For most governments, you have women taking 6 months off. And I believe, at least at the state level in Lagos State, the first 6 months you take off. And then the second 6 months, you work half days. Just so that it allows, so you close work at 2 because you still have a young child at home. So just so those kind of policies, making it more friendly for women, either to have their kids around, the carer around, because women will always think of their children first, right? You're at work typing, your boss is breathing down your neck, and you're just thinking in your head, has this child eaten today? Has the carer given them their medication? So having the kids sort of like in the periphery, like they're not too far. One,
it won't distract them from work.
I'm hoping. I haven't tested that. I haven't tested it yet. Right? I'm still at home 100% of the time with my baby. And secondly, giving that flexibility, which I know the Lagos state government has done, in that in the second, once you go back to work, you resume work at 8, but then you can leave at 2.
Some people say, is it fair though to have a man and a woman start a job, then the woman goes off to have a baby, and then she wants to come back and she expects to be at the same level as the man? Some people say it's unfair.
Unfair to who? Because the reason that she had to take that time off is, so the man who is some woman is being unfair to, his wife had to take time off her job to allow him to work.
Anyway, that's a good one. So let's talk directly about economic opportunities that exist, because they say economic opportunities is, somebody's asking a question as simple as this. If there were better paying jobs for women, do you think we should see an automatic shift of women moving from informal work to formal work? Or do you think there would still be limitations? And if so, which ones? Because women remain in this corporate world with the big salaries and all of that, and they need it. So what do you think, Tola?
Personally, I don't think there will be an automatic shift.
Why?
One, because, so even from this report,
the McKinsey report, yes.
The first, trying to read.
Take it closer to you.
Yeah, so one of the things where we don't have parity is unmet needs for family, the society.
Yeah. Those are societal indicators.
Societal indicators, right? So a lot of, I don't know, there might be women who feel like they might be violating societal norms if they are in higher paying jobs. Those women exist where they don't want to make more money than their husbands. Because you have women who turn down opportunities, promotions, because they don't want to be higher than their husbands, either by society or some form of misunderstood religion.
So we're going to discuss this in a later edition, in another edition. So you're saying even in finding economic opportunities, women would also want to come down a little bit lower?
Not all. I'm just saying that there will be
a majority.
I don't know
do you
the
think
numbers.
differently, Eloho?
I kind of
we could do the research,
I do a little bit. So you asked the question. You gave 2 alternatives.
That's right. Bigger pay, higher pay.
Higher pay, and then you said, what do I think? I actually think the answer to both of those questions, in both of those alternatives, is yes, if you see what I mean. And what I mean is, I think if you just think about it in theory, if you offer anybody higher pay, they start to reassess how they spend their time. Anybody, male or female, right? You have to have another rethink about how you're spending your time. So I think there's always that effect. I also think, though, that part of the issue with the shift, so this is where I agree with Tola, that I don't think you'll see it happen immediately or even necessarily, is that I think people who are already in formal work, you've offered them more money, so they're probably saying, at this rate of what I'm earning now, I love my kids, but you know what, my time is probably better spent earning that extra whatever it is there, hiring somebody, and then having that be sort of how I think about my kids, right? So you start to, at the margin, you start to play with those kinds of thoughts. But in the informal, I'm not sure that the issue there is necessarily, I mean, there's some of it that is attributed to how much can I earn paid versus unpaid.
That's right.
But also what you see a lot in the informal sector is unskilled, less skilled work. Right. So I think it's important to kind of parse what is happening in informal versus what is happening in formal. Informal. So I'm not an informal worker if I own my own business, for example. But I'm probably an informal worker if, and this whole informal thing is really weird.
So it's definitions that are giving us a problem about.
Yeah, I think we need to be careful because people think to say informal, but is a woman who sells pepper, that, well, like maybe you would argue that's informal, but a woman who maybe in Balogun has a big store and she whatever, is that informal work? She's not hired by anybody, but what makes it informal? Is it the fact that she doesn't have access to the banking sector? Does she? You know what I mean? So it's a really weird line.
Which takes me to the question that I'm supposed to ask you. One of the key ones is the unpaid labor market is valued at $10.9 trillion. Do you think this figure is significant? And if so, why? In this figure, you probably find all those work that mothers do and stuff women do, you know. Is it significant, and why do you think it's significant?
Yeah, of course it's significant because it shows sort of how much the 50% or so.
I think of it as a subsidy.
Who's subsidizing who?
We are subsidizing all those people who get to go out, all those men who get to go out. That's the value of the subsidies that women provide to their
you know
work.
What? If this sort of, what's it called, the unpaid labor, right, was somehow calculated into the GDP of each country, I think governments would, you know, if governments would take a second look at the unpaid labor of women. So if in calculating what each country produces, we start putting what women are unpaid for in it, I think it will become more important as a demographic.
Maybe we should pay women for it? I mean, why?
No, not necessarily.
Some people say, why are you paying women to do what is their natural role anyway? Why?
How controversial are we allowed? Because
exactly.
Go ahead.
Two things. One is I actually don't necessarily believe that it's a woman's natural role to I think it takes two to have a child. If you think about it biologically, it's two. I think it's irresponsible to bring a child into the world and to expect that because somebody is a woman, then the burden of raising that child falls to exclusively her.
I like the word exclusively.
I find it really absurd because you biologically, you had that child together. That child is better off for having a father and a mother in its life. That child is better off for having you both engaged and raising the child together. So just morally, I have a real problem with the idea that it is a woman's natural role to raise children. I've also mentioned the subsidy point because I think what happens when we kind of fall into that kind of thinking is, and for me, I'm very conscious of it because of course I work professionally, we all do, is every hour of my time that is not potentially a 50-50 split of my time on something that falls to me just because of my gender. I actually am a little bit offended by that because I think this is time that I could be spending, you know, doing something else.
Fair enough. But that's for the societal, the conversation is going towards in that direction. Yeah. You know, and but I would ask, what advice would you give government about? Because it's like opening, it's economic opportunities we are more concerned about here. So before I want us to do quick take on what you think, what advice would you give government about opening its doors to foreign direct investments that are so badly needed? Tola, you go, your strategy.
I mean, so off the top of my head, maybe consistent monetary and fiscal policies, because anybody that's going to bring their money to invest in your economy, right? The first thing they're going to look is your track record, right? How your monetary policy changes, how it will potentially affect their business. So like, I mean, are we being specific or just general?
You can be specific.
So like in Nigeria, if we look at our monetary policy.
Can we be specific? Like a yo-yo.
So like our FX policy, right? Our monetary policy, it's like you almost have to wake up each day. You have to check each day. If I were advising an investor, a foreign investor, I would have to check each day.
What are they saying now?
The headlines, exactly. What are they saying now? When it comes to capital importation, what are the rules around it? Because it's
like a yo-yo.
It's like a yo-yo, right?
Do you feel the same way, Eloho? So advice. I said advice. All right. So what do you advise government to do?
So it's a
Consistency. And what would you say?
Yeah. I tend to agree that sort of stable policy environments are important. I also agree that it's important for us to have foreign direct investment into the country for obvious reasons. I'm pondering though kind of how, how to redirect or to direct some of that FDI into sectors that
encourage
that support women's work. So, for example, back into healthcare and things like that, where we know that women tend to work. And then related to that, I'm saying to myself, well, how potentially does the healthcare industry need to be restructured so that we can pay people in general more? But if there are more women that tend to be employed there, then women in general more.
So should we look at areas, investing in areas where women are comfortable in?
I wouldn't use the word comfortable. I would say there's some
where they play,
where women tend to play. And there are many reasons why women decide that actually this is a better career option for me than others, right? I wouldn't say comfort or discomfort.
Can we name some of these areas, Tola?
Like Eloho already mentioned, healthcare.
Retail, commerce is one that women tend to be pretty...
Agriculture.
Ones that women tend to run away from. That's a terrible choice of words. But one is in tech. A lot of women don't necessarily tend towards, especially the sort of harder skilled side, so coding and things like that. Engineering, you tend to have fewer female engineers. STEM in general, you tend to have less women. So there are patterns around which sectors women tend to work in.
Manufacturing, women run away from.
So, to encourage foreign direct investment, we're talking about ensuring that there's more stable policies and then push people in the direction of doing investing in businesses that otherwise that women are comfortable playing. You don't want me to use the word comfortable.
No, that women tend to play.
But why do they tend to play in those industries though?
There are a couple of reasons, right? I think for one, sometimes over time, I think society has convinced women, especially like in healthcare, that's where they're better. And this is not even only in Nigeria. This is across the globe, right?
Where women are nurses.
Nurses, because we're natural caregivers, right? So
maybe we are.
I think because we're more intuitive, we're natural caregivers. And I think in terms of STEM, that's changing slightly now. Like I have 2 degrees in engineering. And then just, and this is a funny one. I remember when I was about 30 and not married, my mom was complaining to, God, I hope she doesn't listen to this podcast. My mom was complaining to my godmother that I'd refused to marry. And my godmother told her that this is what you get for allowing your daughter to study engineering. No man marries a female engineer. Like I was actually listening to both of them, like they're talking about.
And you were sitting right there.
Sitting right there. And when she said it, she's an educated woman. She schooled abroad. And I looked and I was like, wow.
I can see that I'm going to have a very nice conversation when we're talking about social attitudes. Yeah. But I don't want to round up without you guys directing us indirectly to whoever is listening. Like, what are the steps you think government can take to create industry? What kind of steps should we take? And let's just kind of like quickly think through 3 steps, each of you, or even if it's 2 that you can come up with. What steps can they take to create industry?
Okay, so for me, it's a couple of things. One is our markets are very, very, and when I say markets, I use that word more broadly, or not necessarily physical markets, but our markets tend to be very fragmented. So whether you're talking about, for example, foreign exchange markets, there's lots of fragmentation. Whether you're talking about physical markets, there tends to be lots of fragmentation. And fragmented markets are not good for scale. So that's why we end up in this realm of, we're talking about business, we're always talking about companies and we're talking about small businesses. And there's nothing wrong with small businesses, but mass job creation doesn't happen check it in any economy that has, you have these large industries, and that's where you have people who create mass jobs at mass scale. So one is that we need to figure out how to fix that fragmentation, how to do all the things Tola talked about around stable policy environment, so that when that capital comes in, that capital can be deployed at scale, right? Rather than, it's important. You'll always have people who are small business owners, and that is an important fabric of the economy. But think about even trickle down, right? What if I could be a supplier to multiple large industries as a small business owner? Then that's a much more stable, as a small business owner, I'm a much more stable small business owner than I might be otherwise. So for me, that's the first thing. The second one is a bit more radical, and just because, why
You
not?
sound like you're very radical.
Why not? The second one is also, thinking about, reframing how we think about women's work and women's time. You were asking a question earlier about policies, and we're talking about flexi time and things like that. And this is not just public sector work for me in general. One thing that you see happening in other parts of the world, and I think the reason it's not happening here is more cultural than anything and societal, is all these conversations about, one of the biggest things that steals time from women is fertility. And so you have lots of conversations going on at the moment about things like helping women have children later. And we all say that, and oh my God. But the reality is, if you think about a woman's economic life, these are her most productive years.
So
that's why
create industry, we
women,
have to ensure that
women can start to do things like have their children if they want to a little later. And sort of policies can support that.
So government can do that. What do you think as we round up?
In terms of creating industry, one,
That's right.
I think you have to be, I'm a policy person. So the very first thing, you have to even be deliberate. What kind of industries are you trying to create,
That's
right? Because there's manufacturing, there are different things, but as a country, as a state, as an entity, where do you have comparative advantage, right?
Where do we have comparative?
What do we have comparative advantage?
What do you think?
I think, one, just because of our share population, we can have comparative advantage when it comes to things that need a lot of people. So even BPO, manufacturing, we could. But the reason why we don't, different reason, it's infrastructure, education. So for example, if Nigeria wanted to create a motor industry, car industry, right? First of all, you need intensive education, vocational education. Secondly, you obviously need power. Third, again, being deliberate, because for one industry, you need several support industries for the larger industry. So for example, if I wanted to, again, let's use the car industry, then I need a steel industry to feed into that. I need a smelter industry. I need even fabric industry. I need plastics industry.
So we should think holistically.
But then the first thing, what is the overall goal? Which industry am I trying to even investing? So that's that. Secondly, the other one I'm going to talk about is just regulation again, because right now the world is innovating. A lot of industries are going through disruption, and in this part of the world, usually governments are usually overly prescriptive when it comes to how to build, how to run these sort of industries. And one thing I like is, I think in a couple of countries, especially with fintech, you have these sandbox regulations that help so I know that in the way this industry used to run is getting outdated.
We should move on.
So I have this sort of sandboxes, black boxes. Let's see how it runs, being more flexible, right? As long as the basics are covered, it's secure, it's it's secure.
I know. Go ahead. Just end. Yeah.
Okay, so the basics are covered, right? It's secure, it's reliable, right? But still, let's see how else we can innovate and move on and make this industry better, with newer ideas, right? So sandbox regulation.
has done a few sandboxes.
Sorry?
I think the CBN did a few sandboxes, no? No?
Anyway, because we was round up, I just want to say one word that would capture the whole idea of economic opportunities. One word, I said, or two. Access.
New thinking.
So innovation, access, flexibility. I hear all kinds of things. I hear flexibility. I hear access. I hear innovation. I hear also stop punishing women for wanting to be flexible.
I think we need to shift the way we think.
Shift thinking. That's most critical. New thinking.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tola. Thank you, Eloho, for being with us. And thank you for listening again. It's the GAIA Today's Women's Podcast. And we're talking about shifting the needle for gender parity. We've just finished talking about creating economic opportunities. Thank you.